Okay, it looks like it's starting. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. I'm happy to do this, and I will have at the very end my email address. I'm happy to take questions offline after the fact. I've been at this a long time, and it's something that I think I actually can say something about. Thank you for the introduction, Cheryl. Now, Cheryl's already said some of this. I retired the 1st of January from 20 years at the Computer Science Department. I was an election technology consultant for the League in South Carolina from 2004 forward. I spent 2 years on the board in Richland County, which is Columbia and the state legislature and the university, the 3rd largest county in South Carolina, about 280,000 voters. So it's a little less than 1/3 of Franklin County, for example. I had the good fortune to be able to analyze the statewide South Carolina data. It was declared public record as of 2010, up until September 2020, when the Attorney General said nobody could look at it anymore. I've also analyzed ES&S data in Colorado, Kansas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Texas. We had horrible long lines. We had 7-hour wait times in 2012 in Richland County. We had the last vote was cast at 17 minutes and 59 seconds after midnight. Polls closed at 7. And I did that analysis. And then when Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona, had long lines in the presidential preference primary in 2016, they found me, and I did analysis for them of how many resources would it take based on the sizes of the polling places so they wouldn't have long lines. South Carolina statewide used to use the ES&S Ivotronics, and they now use the ES&S Express Vote. This is the same equipment used in Franklin County before and now, and I think also Lucas and Montgomery County. I think both Toledo and Dayton use the same equipment. So I actually, although my experiences with South Carolina data, it's, I think, entirely relevant to a great deal of Ohio. There's a lot of Ohio that uses different equipment, and it's not statewide the way it is in South Carolina, but at least 3 large counties use the same equipment. Now, I will say up front, I have never seen fraud. I have never seen malfeasance. I have never seen anything to suggest that somebody tried to cook the books. I have seen, I think, all of the possible errors that can be made using a system that has not made it hard to make mistakes. And that's my biggest complaint. The election officials will always say it's human error, implying that it's the election workers on the ground. Sometimes the error is by the humans who designed and implemented the system in the vendor location. If the system is badly done, then that's not the fault of the election workers. If the system cannot be used as intended by the intended users, it's the system that's at fault, not the users. And that needs to be pushed, because election officials, although I think they are generally sincere, want to push back to protect the fact that no election in a large jurisdiction is going to run perfectly. It's not going to happen that way. And I think the officials are very sensitive to that, and they overcompensate by trying to pass the blame off somewhere else. So general outline, why are elections hard, and why do I, as a computer scientist, believe that we should use the minimal amount of technology as possible. The difference between corrupting an election and disrupting an election. And most of it is the flow of data. And if you look at the data flow, you can determine that there are vulnerabilities way along the line, and these are the vulnerabilities people should be asking about looking over the shoulders to see that they're done right. We've seen any number of errors, and I've seen several errors with the ES&S equipment in South Carolina. These errors are almost the same errors that have been seen using Dominion equipment in Michigan and Georgia. So that's like 75, 80% of the total election market in the United States. And then what should concerned citizens do to try to improve what's going on by simply politely asking the appropriate questions? Now, why are elections hard? Well, election day is distributed in space. It's staffed by volunteers. It's done in different locations that have different support for technology, different wireless connections, different power connections, different sizes. There have been problems with some places because there simply weren't enough power outlets in an elementary school cafeteria to accommodate that many pieces of equipment. And then the standard quote, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. Even given all of the planning, it's not going to be perfect. You can't stop. You can't hit pause. You can't do a do-over. It's gotta work. And we have no idea what the answer actually is supposed to be. The answer is who won. We don't know that. So the process is all that we have to make sure things go right. And of course, the public and the media and the press want the results instantly. They don't want the right results. They want the results now. And I certainly have never felt that there was any reason to force election officials to produce results any faster than they could produce correct results, because correct is better than fast. One of the problems is that elections are very much a niche commercial market. So there are only 3 major vendors with a 4th coming in, and that's about it. So there's not a lot of competition, and it's government. Election equipment gets bought every 10 to 15 years. So it's not something that constantly gets updated. The other big problem, and this came out all through the pandemic era, all of the national news about complaints about mail-in votes and timing of mail-in votes and signature verification, the laws from one state to another vary enormously. So almost nothing that J-Random Voter hears on the national news is going to apply to J-Random Voter, because it's going to be something from a different state. You have to get really drilled down into specifics of state law before you really can understand what the issues might be. And that just complicates the issue. It muddies the waters. Now, I've said this many times, too often there is a shortage of skepticism and an excess of hubris. I do not refer anymore to voting machines, because I think when people think of a machine, they think of something that works. When they think of a computer, they are a lot more skeptical about whether it works. And what is being used, certainly in Franklin County, is a computer. It's a general purpose computer with a program. We should be surprised, given the way computers and software are done, when things actually work. And the other big deal, federal certification requires tests by approved testing labs. I think there are only 3 at the moment, paid for by the vendors. So I saw bugs in 2010 in South Carolina that were still there in 2018. And one of those bugs caused the Richland County election director to get fired because the bug caused votes not to be counted. We don't get Patch Tuesdays. We don't get pinged for updates. They happen very rarely, if at all. And that's a problem. That's something we should be worried about. We should be careful about which certification version is being used. That's available from the Federal Election Commission, from the Election Assistance Commission. And some versions are certified, some are not certified. There is at least one state that is supposed to require certification that is using a version that is not certified yet. That's a problem, and this is not something people know about unless they really dig hard. The other big problem is there's no way to test. Richland County, 280,000 voters, 150 locations, 1,800 poll workers, 1,100 gadgets going out. There's no way to test at scale. The best you can do is to run an election with all of the preparation that you can think of and try to make sure things work. It's just not possible to run a test at scale. And that makes it hard, especially when you're using something like computer technology that you can't really trust to be perfect. Dan Slotnick was University of Illinois computing professor, and he said, I want to build everything as simply as possible because everything is complicated. Now, simple. Franklin County got rid of the Ivotronics about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, same time Richland, South Carolina did. The 2007 Everest report for the Secretary of State of Ohio is still the official report on the Ivotronic. 515,000 lines of code, 9 different programming languages, 5 different hardware platforms. This is not a simple system. And the Everest report concluded by saying this system should not be used for voting. It continued to be used for voting, at least in Franklin County, until 1 year, 2 years ago. Now, corruption versus disruption. Corruption is something, in my view, is something like throwing a box of printed ballots off the back of a truck on the way to county headquarters and replacing them with a different box that has different votes so that you can actually change the counts. You're genuinely changing the counts. I've never seen deliberate corruption, but that's an issue. The problem is that it is a lot easier to disrupt an election. New Jersey in 2012 almost had Hurricane Sandy totally disrupt their election. I was standing in line in Richland County for my 3 hours waiting to vote, texting back and forth with someone in New Jersey who voted in a mobile home with a generator providing power because Hurricane Sandy had come through and they had to fix things. If you get into the voter database and you corrupt the addresses so that thousands of people in some particular demographic show up at the polls and are told they're not registered there, they have to go downtown to fix their registration, that will slow things up and disrupt an election by causing a lot of people to decide not to vote. I think that's one of the biggest dangers that we have, actually. More and more people are using electronic poll books that connect back to home base at county headquarters from the polling place. I think this is a horrible idea because it instantly says you're going to have bandwidth problems. It says that you've got, Richland County, you've got 150 sets of poll books, Franklin County, maybe 500, all phoning home to the same location all day on election day. That could be a problem. You've got to worry about bandwidth. And we know that there have been instances in which bandwidth has been a problem, or the poll books just didn't work, as they didn't work in Georgia 2020. And it slows things down. It creates long lines and people walk out of line because they just can't manage to vote. 2012, one of my colleagues at South Carolina voted for the first time as a new citizen And he said that it cost him $150 in extra babysitting fees because he was in line for 6 or 7 hours. This is a problem. Now, let's look at the data, because this is where things actually happen. Everything starts with the voter registration database. My understanding as of a week or two ago is that there is a statewide voter registration database in Ohio that is served to each of the counties. When I was in South Carolina, I logged into the state database to find my information. Here in Franklin County, I log into the Franklin County database, but I'm told that there is a statewide database that gets served up to the various counties. This is important because every voter lives in certain jurisdictions, and at any polling place, you're going to have a different ballot style for all of the different voters who show up with different jurisdictions. I just voted last 2 weeks ago in the primary, and there were at least, I was told, 9,000 voters at my polling place. There were maybe 10 different ballot styles and maybe 20 different precincts. And this is an enormous, complicated process. And this, I'll talk about this a little later. This is where a lot of the errors occur. The polling place equipment, scanners, direct recording electronic ballot marking devices like the new Express Votes, these are configured with the ballot styles. So I went in and I was told Blendon 2- ballot style 509, I think it was. And that pulled up the ballot that was appropriate for me. Voting happens. If it's a polling place, you only have to have the ballot styles for the people who will show up at that location. In places that do vote centers, you've got to have all of the ballot styles all the way across the county, because you could have people showing up from anywhere in the county. And then the results come back from the polling place on election day to a central location and get accumulated, and intermediate results are tabulated. Now, the problem with the voter registration database is that although I can look myself up, that better not be the official database. Robert Mueller, 15, 18 years ago, said there are only 2 kinds of computers on the internet: those that have already been hacked and those that have not yet been hacked. If the VR database is on the internet, we can assume that it will be corrupted because it has value. And if it's on the internet and it has value, it will be corrupted. There should be a pristine copy, kept pristine by various protocols, offline, except when updated under very, very careful circumstances. That part is not rocket science. We used to do this in my previous job. We knew how to do this. This is not deep science. It's just a question of doing the right things. If the online version is the official version, then the possibility of all these ballot styles could be that you configure them from bad data. And that can lead to disruption. That can lead to problems. So what happens with the Express Votes, what happened with the Ivotronics in the past, there will be some sort of electronic file that is delivered to the counties that says, here are all of your ballot styles. You know, my ballot style was 509 for Blendon Township, State Rep District 4, I think, et cetera, et cetera. The scanners need to be configured to understand these things. None of this should happen on a computer connected to the internet. And what most people don't understand, and I think a lot of election officials don't understand, is that a flash drive is a computer. If you plug a flash drive into a computer that is connected to the internet, and then plug that into a different computer that you think is not connected to the internet, you have just connected that allegedly unconnected computer to the internet. And I think a lot of people, a lot of election officials may not realize this or may feel they can skirt the issue. It is alleged that one of the reasons the US and the Israelis brought down the Iranian nuclear centrifuges was by sprinkling a bunch of flash drives in the parking lot. And somebody picked one up and said, oh, cool, and plugged it in and infected the centrifuge system with the malware that destroyed the centrifuges. This is not rocket science. This can be done by university students. Now, the express votes, for example, claim to have no internal memory. It is claimed that everything the express votes do runs off a flash drive that gets plugged into the back on the morning of election day. So the configuration is done at county headquarters. They flash thousands of flash drives, which get plugged into all of the BMDs, all of the express votes. And that is what gives the ballot marking device the ability to operate. One of the problems is the express vote records XY coordinates. It does not record candidate and contest choices. And I'll show you what this means in a minute. And this has been probably the biggest single error from 2020 forward across the country, causing any amount of screaming and yelling, of hacking, when in fact it's just stupid. It's just a mistake. The vendors do not seem to understand how to do the sort of thing that we teach undergraduate computer scientists to do. And again, this is a big job. So Richland County, we would send out 150 scanners, maybe 175 to account for bigger polling places, 1,100 BMDs. Franklin County would be 3.5 times bigger. You can do the math. This is a lot of stuff. This is a lot of gadgetry. Voting happens. Absentee comes in on paper. Early voting happens. Election day happens. There is a huge push by a guy named Brad Tusk, who made his money with Uber and some other things, to let everybody vote over the internet. And all of the things that Brad Tusk has pushed as the way to do it have been debunked almost instantly by computer security researchers. And then at the very end, you have to adjudicate provisional ballots, but those are generally a very small number. In Richland County in 2020, I think we had less than 15 provisional ballots. And so that's not a big deal. The big deal is everything comes in after the polls close. The whole question of whether you count before or after the polls close, that's one of the big things that is a hassle across the country. South Carolina, up until 2020, we had maybe 5 to 7% of the votes absentee by mail. For 2020, it was 45%. And in anticipation of this, the state legislature said they could start opening the outer envelopes Sunday morning before Tuesday, instead of only Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. And one of the big issues that has come up repeatedly is, why aren't the results instantly there? At 7:01 p.m. after polls close. Dana de Beauvoir, who has run elections in Austin, Texas for 25 years, said, most people don't realize it's not election day, it's election week, because it takes that long to actually get the final results. Now, results come back. All of the gadgets should come home. One of the problems with the previous system is there was no software that verified by serial number that all of the hardware that had been sent out on election day had come home safely. That's just stupid. So Richland would send out 1,100 direct recording devices. There was no way to confirm that all that stuff had come home safely. The flash drives could come home. The paper should come home. It all comes home at the same time. I will say the woman who managed things coming home for Richland County had really done it right. She commandeered the lower floor of the county building, and she had a whole series of steps that people would go through to turn in this part and that part and that part. I can imagine Franklin County is going to be 3 times bigger, 4 times bigger. And eventually you have to accumulate everything probably onto one computer. So all of the all of the scanners will come back with their vote totals. And those vote totals will have to be accumulated at county headquarters. Everybody wants instant answers. In South Carolina, we were told we ought to be publishing results, intermediate results, about once an hour. And the problem is, how do you do that? You have a central computer not connected to the internet, and you need to dump results to some removable medium and move that to a computer connected to the internet, and then not reuse that device. Either Boulder County or Denver County, I can never remember which, said they bought a whole bunch of flash drives at Staples, left them in the shrink wrap in the safe until election day. And as they needed them, they pulled them out one at a time. And after they used them once, they gave them away to whoever wanted them. It's not a big expense. You know, $2 for a flash drive 6 times is not a big expense. My first time watching express votes on the election commission, I watched a flash drive get reused. And when I complained, the IT person was really ticked off that I had pointed out he had done something absolutely wrong. There are ways to destroy flash drive content. You can get flash drives where you have a little key and it will hardware erase everything on the flash drive. Those are, last I checked, it was like $175 for an 8 GB flash drive. And do you really trust people under pressure after a 15-hour day to do all of that and get it right? For my money, if I were going to do it, I would write things to a CD, dump the CD to the internet, and then drop the CD in the shredder. CDs are 20 cents a piece. It's really cheap. And that way you know you are not reconnecting. The other problem we have is what's called the watering hole problem. Animals like lions gather around the water hole because they know everybody else that they want to eat is going to have to show up there eventually. If you're looking at election day, election night is the watering hole. You know exactly when things are going to be happening. After polls close until the results are finalized, that's when your target is. Now, what errors have we seen? How am I doing on time? I'm good for time. Antrim County in Michigan, a little bit northeast of Traverse City, made any number of errors, and they have been the poster child for the Stop the Steal movement about why everything regarding Dominion equipment has been hacked, and it's all nonsense. All of the errors were errors. I have seen every single one of the errors that Antrim County made in the South Carolina data over a period of 10 years, just not in the same county in the same election. I'll talk about the first of the errors they made. One of the errors was that they transcribed some numbers by hand. and got it wrong. Well, if you started work at 4 in the morning and it's 10 o'clock at night, you're going to be tired. In South Carolina, I saw one school board election where none of the 5 candidates got the right number of votes, but at least they were in the right order. And I can certainly provide Alex's report. It's a brilliant report. And the problem is ES&S and Dominion at least do not make it hard to make mistakes. They do not bulletproof their software. And I have an email from one of the software gods at ES&S who says, we expect the users to know how to use our software. Well, that's exactly what we teach students is unacceptable. Now, the biggest problem is that the barcodes in the express votes, the QR codes in the Dominion system, I don't think there's much Dominion stuff in Ohio. There are a lot of places that use ES&S. What they encode is an XY coordinate. If you look at the hand-marked paper ballot that you would get as an absentee voter, it will have basically half-inch high rows, maybe 2 columns across, maybe 3 columns across, and a bubble in the middle. And what gets encoded is which row, which column. And the biggest problem that shows up is what happens if the rows and columns at the polling place are different from the rows and columns at county headquarters. And I'll go into more detail. What happens is everything gets shifted up 1 row and counted for the wrong people. And we've seen this over and over and over again. That's the biggest single problem right now. And the problem is the configuration file at the polling place is not signed and authenticated to be the same as the configuration file used at county headquarters. So South Carolina, the first time I saw this was 2010 in Beaufort County, Northampton, Pennsylvania in 2019. There's a really kind of a cute anecdote there. They had to redo, they were told by the state that they could not list candidate name and party endorsement separately. They had to list one candidate name and then the list of party endorsements. So they said, okay, we'll do that. But then they put in an information box because they said the voters are going to see something different from what they've usually seen. And the information box got 25,000 votes. So when they went back, and the guy who was supposed to win, who actually won in the judgeship, was shorted. He got like 250 votes and the other candidates got 20,000 something. When they fixed all this stuff, the guy who was supposed to win actually won. This is what happened in Antrim County. At the presidential level, Biden got 3 times more votes than they thought he would because they shifted everything up 1 line in the XY coordinates. DeKalb County, one of the district commissioner races, the person who eventually won was listed on election day as having 0 votes in something like 60 of 100 precincts. And that was because they did redistricting and they didn't get her ballot configurations done right. This is the biggest problem. People cry foul and it's just stupidity. So what happened in Beaufort County, 2010, there were 2 county council races in Bluffton 2C. There was only 1 in the Ivotronic at the polling place. So with 700 something votes cast, there were no votes for the 2nd county council seat. All of the votes got shifted up 1, and nobody noticed with 700 and something votes that the last thing on the ballot, which was the 4th constitutional amendment, got 0 votes for and 0 votes against. I mean, this is most of what we see that people are screaming and yelling about. It's just bad configurations. We've seen this over and over again. Why does this happen? The central computer is a Windows computer. The systems in the polling place are different hardware, different operating systems. They're distributing these ballot configurations from the central computer, and there isn't an authentication device. Why is this not rocket science? If anybody has ever signed something like a real estate transaction online, there's an authentication code that gets added to the document as it flies over the internet so that you can verify that the document has not been changed. This is standard computer science. We teach this to mid-level undergraduates. None of the three major vendors do this. Correcting the error is a big deal. Detecting that an error has occurred is dead simple. And once you know there's an error, then you can fix things. You can at least look more carefully. We saw votes double counted in South Carolina. This also has been a problem in Georgia. So in South Carolina, with the DREs, each DRE had a flash drive in the back. You could total those votes, or you could total those votes using this little handheld gadget. There was one precinct where one of the computers was misbehaving, so they uploaded the votes from the flash drive, but then stupidly they uploaded the votes from all the other flash drives, and there were 168 votes counted twice. Similar sort of thing has happened in Georgia, where they have misplaced. So in Georgia, in the Dominion system, the vote totals are stored in the gadget the voter inserts in the device. And they have misplaced things and lost a few hundred thousand votes, a few hundred votes, a few thousand votes, until they checked to make sure they had all the hardware. Once they check that they have all the hardware, things are okay. The other question I keep wanting to ask is, we saw this with the Ivotronics. What if you look in the system log for the device, what if it says, I'm not feeling well today, I'm making errors? What do you do after the fact? If the computer is saying it's not functioning properly, how do you know what to do with the votes that computer produced? If you ignore them, you're disenfranchising voters who happened to be steered for that particular device. If you count them, you're counting votes that the computer has told you might not be correct. That's a problem. I think this is why we ought to be going back to hand-marked paper, scanned with a scanner, and audited with a statistical audit that verifies the scanner is producing the same result that we would get if we counted everything by hand. Now, there are places right now that are saying we need to count every vote by hand. That's the way Europe does it. The problem is with our democracy, we vote in Europe and most places, when they vote, there's only one thing on the ballot, which means hand counting is not that hard. We vote everything from president down to dog catcher on the same 2-page, 3-page ballot. Miami County had one that was 12 pages. Hand counting something like that is just not feasible. So what can people do? We need to try to minimize the technology, not because it's been hacked, because we don't know that it's been hacked, not that it could be hacked, but because it's done badly and people make mistakes and the bugs don't get fixed. We need to realize that computer security is always defensive. We don't know what the bugs are. And until somebody happens to find a bug, and this happens, almost every other day, somebody announces a new bug. And we need to recognize that software is too hard to trust. We need to have a way that is independent of software for verifying what the election results are. And as far as internet, Andrew Appel just sent to a small group a really brilliant draft of a journal paper he's going to publish in the University of New Hampshire Law Review. He says by the end of September, it will be publicly available. It is really amazingly well done. I've known Andrew for several years. He's done a fabulous job of debunking the notion that internet voting is reasonable. There are two major systems, Democracy Live and Votes in the United States, and both were discredited as being not nearly anything close to what they claimed they were by Michael Spector and Alex Halderman at MIT and University of Michigan, mostly. So my email address, I think I'm the only Duncan Buell in the country. So if you Google my name, there used to be an architect named Duncan Buell, but he was in Philadelphia and was mid-80s or something when he died a few years ago. I think I'm the only Duncan Buell. You will find me. I'm not hard to find on the internet. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes, let me.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for your talk. I found it really interesting. I'll be brave and admit that I'm in Florida. I've liked the way they changed from the hanging chads to where we go into a little booth and we use a black marker and do the fill in the bubble like a standardized test. Then we go up to a machine and stick it in. Am I correct in thinking that is scanning how I voted? And then that gets tallied on something, which then goes somewhere.
So
You
that
explain
would
how
be,
that works?
which county in Florida?
I'm in, oh gosh, I'm embarrassed to say Sarasota.
Sarasota.
Yes.
Yeah, so Sarasota 2006 was where the Ivotronic was deemed to be unacceptable. And they got rid of all of those after the congressional election in 2006. And South Carolina bought some of those.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
No, so one advantage of hand-marked paper is you have the paper. So if there's any question, you can actually scan the paper. Another advantage is the only technology is the scanner. And if you print up 1,000 ballots with exactly some number of votes, you can run those through 5 times. And if you don't get the answer you want, you calibrate the stupid scanner. And you know, they have the little timing marks down the side allow for how does it determine which is row 2, row 3, or whatever. But yeah, so my argument would be hand-marked paper scanned at the polling place, because you get small totals. So this helps the corruption. If you have to post the totals for each polling place on the way out the door, you have a whole bunch of small numbers. And if you're going to corrupt, it's a lot harder because the small numbers have to add up.
Right. That's a good point. But you brought up an interesting point I hadn't thought of. I used to always go to the polling place because I just like going to the polling place. And then with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, I started doing some of the, like at least dropping it off at the voting place or mailing it in. But now I'm thinking I probably shouldn't do that. It seems like it adds more steps for the people that are counting the votes, where somebody, I never thought about, they have to take it out of the envelope and take it out of the internal envelope and scan it. Would you suggest it's better just to show up the way I used to at the polling place and do it myself?
I would say either way. I voted absentee by mail in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So Ohio declares only 1 ballot drop per county. In Richland, in South Carolina in 2020, we had 7 or maybe 8 different ballot drops scattered around the county. So it wasn't that far to find someplace.
Mhm.
Legislature said that you couldn't put them outside. You had to have them inside the early voting location so they could be watched. I'm a little queasy about the places that put them outside like mailboxes and claim they can do surveillance cameras. That bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, a little
I have
sketchy.
a problem with, put it inside the early voting polling place so that it was under some control.
Yes, we have a policeman or something standing right next to it, and they ask you, have you signed the envelope? So anyway, I'll stop now. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks, Debbie. Dr. Beal, you've certainly given us so much to think about, so many places where errors can happen. So who in the United States is doing the best job of doing it correctly with the least chance of errors?
Colorado. And more recently, Rhode Island, although so small that it's hard to conclude best practices from a state that small. Colorado seems to have been doing it right.
And expound on that. What's their process?
So they do require audits of not every contest every time, but a sufficient number that they're actually pretty sure that things are done right.
Who are you talking to?
When they do, so they are almost entirely hand-marked paper. One of the things that they do that I think is smart, when they have to update software, they send somebody out from the state to each county to update the software. They don't simply send out a CD and say, plug this in and update the software. And that way, the people doing the updates have done it before. They are reasonably expert. And it's just a whole lot simpler. One of the problems, and this goes to the hubris of election officials, they think they're doing everything right. And however well-intentioned they might be, they very often are just not aware enough about all of the glitches with computers. And I have lots of connections in Colorado. If you shoot me an email and I will produce some. Parts of California are doing it right. Los Angeles dropped $300 million into a system that totally failed. Northern California has been doing much better, the San Francisco area.
Okay. Other questions?
Chuck.
Thank you, Duncan. I sense that you're not crazy about internet voting, although is it not true that there are several organizations that are using it, including our military overseas and internet voting for people with disabilities? And I think West Virginia is using a blockchain protocol. So have those been discredited?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So most places now will deliver ballots over the internet. And I have no objection to delivering a ballot over the internet to be printed out, filled in by hand, and mailed back. And one of the things that I've never gotten a straight answer on is with regard to the military voters. And of course, the military is a big deal. I have not heard in the last 40 years that we have troops so far out of reach that they're starving and not getting, resupplied with meals and ammunition. Ballots are fairly light. I think it's only a question of willpower that, if they can deliver ammunition, they can come back with ballots. And so I think that really is a red herring. And unfortunately, none of the presidents going back 25 years have declared that, voting for the military should be a big deal. An anecdote, my uncle graduated from the Naval Academy in 1939. And in the fall of 1940, his job apparently in San Francisco was to drive all around San Francisco to make sure all the sailors had been able to vote. And he said, what kind of a great job is this? I get to drive around a great city at government expense. My father voted from a destroyer escort in the middle of the Pacific in 1944. There was a time when voting by the military was apparently considered important. I'm not sure it's at the same level of importance, but it should be. Delivery of ballots over the internet, I have no problem with. It's the return of ballots over the internet, by email, by PDF, by fax, whatever. That's just not smart. I can certainly, I'm waiting. I've asked Andrew Appel for when his paper will be available. It's really, really well done. And it's for a law review, so it's not a technical paper.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Who would like the last question?
Patty had a question that she put in the chat. It says, what steps can we as citizens or election workers take to ensure election integrity?
I think I suspect that the best thing that citizens can do is politely to ask the questions that have come up with regard to the errors. I would like to know, for example, if the Franklin County voter registration database really does have a clean backup copy. I would like to know how the ballot configurations are done. I would like to know how intermediate results are taken from the allegedly unconnected computer and sent to the internet for the media and the candidates and the parties. I don't think those are so pointed that if politely asked, one couldn't get at least some kind of a reasonable answer. And we have all of these. So the big issue, for example, in Lake County, which was one of the places, like 6 months, a year ago, apparently there was an attempted hack, and there was some comment that, oh, that was the county computer system, that was not the election system. This is a question I have of Franklin County. Is the election system in Franklin County simply firewalled away from the rest of the county, or is it actually genuinely disconnected? Because if it's only a firewall, that's hubris. And I think that's a big deal. You've got to simply say, are you really disconnected? In my previous job, where NSA took security very seriously, we had an unconnected computer in the unclassified wing, and it was totally disconnected. There was nothing to connect it to the classified system. If all that people are relying upon is a software package, then they are relying upon the inability of a hacker to find a flaw in that. And I think that's a mistake. It should be actually genuinely disconnected, period. And people who are serious about security do that. We did. So as an example, in my previous job at IDA, we were not allowed to have speaker phones because there was a possibility that the speaker phone would broadcast something through the wall to someone in the next office who wasn't cleared. They literally went in and opened up 150 phones and cut the wires to the speakers. That's what you do if you're serious about security. And I think that's the hubris part. So I think looking at where the vulnerabilities are and just politely asking, are the steps being taken? That's important. And if you don't get the right answer, you can kind of decrease the politeness bit by bit until maybe you do get an answer.
All right. Great answer. Very, very impactful lecture. I appreciate it. Gives us all very much to think about. And Duncan, thank you for sharing your email so we can follow up with you. We are recording, we did record this and we will make it available. Thank you to everyone for attending. And Dr. Buell, thank you so very much for presenting this information to us today.
Happy to do it and to stay involved. This is important. This is our country.
Yes. All right. Thank you all very much. Good night.